In Control, the way the oldest house is designed is a huge asset in what makes Control feel so easy to move through and allows for really spontaneous gameplay moments. But what makes the map design in Control different from other maps? I have been replaying Control in preparation for playing Alan Wake 2. In doing so, one of the things I noticed is the sense of freedom you have to move around the areas in the oldest house. Everything feels so close. You never have to retread a lot of old ground to get to the new mission spaces, and you are always really close to the side content. Looking again at my recent playthrough, I think you could say the game is linear and far between the first time you see areas, and then flattens out for everything to be quickly accessible immediately after. Now, when I say flat, I mean conceptually flat. Look at this, and this, and this. The physical spaces are not flat. I'm referring to the idea that from the time you are given a goal in another part of the oldest house to the time you are on the scene investigating that goal is really short, in both distance and time. I can kinda armchair game dev summarize this into 3 things: checkpoints and locks, shortcuts, and building around and up instead of out. Checkpoints is pretty obvious, they're checkpoints. Checkpoints come in the form of these control points, and you can fast travel to and from them. Control has checkpoints everywhere. Sometimes you'll unlock one, and you'll do one combat encounter before unlocking the next one. This is nice in the main playthrough, but the main story missions are really where the game progresses linearly as you visit new areas of the Bureau of Control. So they might even be a little too dense really, speaking purely for the main missions. Where they come in handy is in returning to the places for future missions or to do the side content. With checkpoints every few feet, you can always fast travel to somewhere close to your objective. Control also uses a pretty simple locking system to gate content too. There are 2 kinds of locks. One is the clearance level that increments higher as you complete more and more story missions. The other is classic Metroidvania progress gating, where the content isn't accessible until the player has unlocked a certain skill or ability. The next point is shortcuts, which is also related to the way the game locks down the map until you have done some content, then opens up if you want to come back later. So in the containment division, where you first come here for the story, there is this big, identifiable, dope as hell room, and as you run towards your goal, you are confronted with these locked security checkpoints. This forces you to go through the medical wing to get to your goal. But you can open these from the other side. So now when you come back later to go to the prime candidate wing, you can travel to this big iconic room, you run forward through the now open security checkpoints, and around the corner into the new content that was locked behind a clearance door. The structure is now so flat and easy to get around. Similarly, when you first discover the Panopticon, you start at the bottom and you have to make your way along and around the sides of the space. But then shortly after, you get the levitate ability, and now you can float your way back down to the control point here, or explore the new areas. And finally, coming back to that initial thesis somewhat, the thing that flattens out the map the most. Control's map is really layered and vertical, building up and around itself rather than out. A great example of this is this entrance foyer in the research sector. This could have been splayed out across a lot of flat space, but instead, the spaces are layered on top of each other. You've got dimensional research up here. This heads to ritual. This is the main foyer and heads down to Darling's lab. This set of doors takes you to parapsychology. This area down the bottom here has side content, and then as you float down here, this has an active threshold. The verticality really takes advantage of Jesse's abilities. We can travel to research from the central elevator, jump over the ledge here, and float all the way down into this hole to start a side quest, which is way more interesting and freely navigable than if you needed to just run through corridor after corridor. And this also allows some really unique differentiation between the spaces in what is essentially all a brutalist office building. How many buildings have massive trees in their subdivisions? We already mentioned the Panopticon and moving vertically through there. There are also places like the energy converters and the coolant pumps where the space is vertical and open, creating interesting gameplay opportunities before you get levitate. To accompany this, the space also folds back on itself. To get to the Black Rock Quarry, the player needs to run over the top of the energy converters and then over the top of the NSC, which during unlocks this shortcut to the power converters. So everything has this intricate connectedness that makes it easy to get around and reinforces the understanding of the space. Linear and long when you go through it initially, but flattened and accessible when you are returning. Now, this isn't new or uncommon. For example, you could say Final Fantasy XVI that just came out has a bunch of these side areas that behave in mostly the same way. I think Control just stood out for me because everything seems so navigable and close to the control points, but only after you engage with the space traditionally as a level, where in other games like Final Fantasy or the new Tomb Raiders, there is usually somewhat of a trek to get to those new side areas. But also maybe it's just because you can't fly. Levitate is super dope after all. Anyway, again, like to get to an endgame boss battle in Control, they don't waste any of your time. This is the whole journey. You fast travel to a control point, move to the next room and float to another door that previously wasn't open, and bam, you're there. And it makes sense in the context of the space you already have played through previously. But let's not pretend that this is game design gospel either, though. In Souls-likes or roguelikes, the lack of checkpoints is often core to the game design, which is the exact opposite of what's working here for Control. So naturally, this is not some sort of one-size-fits-all solution, and different players might even appreciate it differently. I have a review of Control from when it came out that was interesting to revisit after replaying the game. The review holds up remarkably well, which is surprising to me. The only thing I disagree with from the original review is that I was way too harsh on the story. Like most Remedy stuff, you need to dig a little and probably play it twice to appreciate it properly and unpack it fully. You can check that out here. And thanks for watching.